everybody. This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts Podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving. Today, we are talking to Miss T, who is one of our amazing tutors, and she is going to talk to us about her experience as an autistic person and also her experience as an autistic tutor working with autistic kids. Welcome to the podcast, Ms. T.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. It's exciting. And I'm really happy to be talking about being on the spectrum and what it's like being around people who are on the spectrum.
Awesome. Well, when did you discover that you were on the spectrum?
Pretty recently, in my 20s. It's a newer disorder, though a lot of autistic people do not consider themselves to be wrong in any way or it to be a bad thing. It's just part of how we are. Some people do, some people don't. You know, it's not homogenous, it's a community. So in my 20s, I found out, and I actually found out because I started hanging out with more and more autistic people, and they came to me and they were like, "You're definitely autistic, just so you know." So that was kind of how I found out, especially because women or girls or people who are perceived as girls are more likely to be dismissed in terms of being on the spectrum. It also presents differently by gender, and that's mostly cultural.
Really? Can you share more about that?
I can. So there's a couple of different ways. One is girls are socialized to be more, I want to say demure, but that's not really it, but that's part of it. They're socialized to be more accepting of other people taking the lead. They're socialized to be able to fit in more than boys. The whole boys will be boys thing. It's harder for young girls to express themselves as openly. Thankfully, that's changing, but that has been one of the reasons. Another reason is girls tend to have more acceptable special interests. So for those that don't know, a special interest is a very common thing across the spectrum, where an autistic person will be heavily focused in one area or subject, and it becomes a hyper obsession. Now, for girls, it tends to manifest in things like pop culture or fashion or music, things that are more acceptable. Not always, but it's very common for that to happen. Also, it's easier for boys to get diagnosed with ADHD and things like that too. It's just, unfortunately, there is a medical bias towards boys where their symptoms and problems are treated more seriously.
That's interesting. And I know that I've recently learned that that's also the case with race as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Like, not gonna lie about that. Race is a big factor. Economic status is also a big factor. You know, the more money you have, the more seriously you're going to be taken by doctors. And unfortunately, yeah, the entire medical field is filled with a lot of bias, and you're less likely to have your pain treated seriously if you're a person of color. You're less likely to be noticed in a lot of ways.
Well, that's sad, but I think your generation is definitely changing the pendulum on lots of things, including race and gender disparities.
Yeah, I think so too. And autism is really recent. I think the first person diagnosed with it is still alive. Yeah. So it's things like this are still we're still struggling to understand them. We're still struggling to understand gender and race and how all these things intersect in general. So moving forward, hopefully there'll be more background to build upon.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. I, as a dyslexic, always say my dyslexic superpower is entrepreneurialism. Do you think autistic people also have superpowers?
I do. There are definitely setbacks, as with everything, but there's also a lot of really cool stuff. And again, it's not homogenous and people present differently. So it's going to be different for everyone. But one of the things is attention to detail. Yeah. Part of autism is having a really high sensory experience with the world. So noticing things that other people don't notice is pretty common.
Oh.
Yeah. Another one is clear communication and honesty.
Sorry, I'm laughing because you're naming all these characteristics that I have, which are sometimes looked at as faults and not necessarily positives. But sorry for interrupting. Carry on.
No worries, you're totally fine. Well, that's what I'm saying, is everything is kind of a double-edged sword, but if we try and encourage the positivity of it and embrace that, then that'll be the side that shines more, right? So yeah, honesty is a big one because lying is a huge social maze that a lot of autistic people struggle with, myself included. I don't like lying. So honesty is a huge superpower because it's not very fun to lie for an autistic person. It's often very difficult or uncomfortable. And that being said, a lot of us also tend to take people genuinely and at their word, which is a superpower and unfortunately can also be abused. So double-edged sword there, but I like to see it as a positive quality of I'm going to take this person at their word and believe them and trust them, you know? So that's one. Yeah, the attention to detail, the honesty, the sensory stuff is really cool. A lot of autistics are very, very creative. It's a big one. There's also, with that genuine and honestness, there's a level of acceptance that a lot of autistic people have towards people that are not like them. So internal biases tend to be a little bit lower. You know, it's, oh, I'm not going to see this person as their race or their gender or their identity in any way politically. I'm just going to see them as a person. Which I consider to be a superpower, honestly. Yeah. So those are some positive qualities. There's more, but those are the big three that come off the top of my head. Okay.
And what would you say your autistic superpower is?
Oh, definitely the attention to detail. I'd make an excellent detective.
I thought you were going to say creative.
Oh, yeah, there's that. There's also the out-of-the-box thinking, because the sensory perception of the world is different. So a lot of autistic people will think in ways that are very obvious to us, but other people will be kind of confused as to how we got there, but appreciative. So the more perspectives you have on something, the better, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what challenges would you say that you have that are associated with your autism?
So there's a couple for me personally, because again, it's different for every autistic person. Some struggle with social stuff more, some struggle with verbalization, stuff like that. Mine is, because of that high sensory experience, I get very overwhelmed by things that are very loud and just a lot in general. Like if I'm walking anywhere, I have these big noise canceling headphones at all times to kind of block that out. Otherwise, it's hard for me to focus or hard for me to function.
So when you say, well, if you're walking anywhere, you mean like out in public or?
Out in public, yeah. Yeah. But it also helps when I'm doing tasks in the home, because I can hear the neighbors' phone conversations sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Like yeah, the super hearing is definitely a superpower, but also definitely a setback.
That's interesting. I have a very sensitive nose and I can smell everything. And so I guess that's my more sensory, heightened sensory versus hearing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, and I think a lot of people that are neurotypical even struggle with some of these things, but autism is more of a grouping of stuff than it is just this is a way a person behaves or is.
Well, how is it? What is your experience like working with autistic students, being that you are autistic?
So there are several benefits. One is that a lot of autistic people do this thing called masking, where we'll imitate neurotypical people's reactions or emotions to things. And when I'm working with autistic kids or talking with autistic people, there's less masking. So it's more of just, I can talk in a monotone with them or they can talk in a monotone with me and I know it doesn't mean anything. It's just easier to talk in that way sometimes, you know? So the lack of masking is a benefit, but also I feel like because I'm on the spectrum, it makes it easier for me to understand why certain students interpret things the way that they do. Like I said, a lot of autistic people are very literal, and that includes the students. So the communication that I have with them is very clear and direct. And I get that back from them because they can see, oh, this is a person that's going to be clear and direct with me. I'm not going to have to worry about interpreting what they're saying. You know,
you don't have to feel like you have to sugarcoat things for them and vice versa.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. If I go, hey, this is where you're struggling, but we can work on it. If they don't take that as, oh, I'm not good enough. They go, oh, this is something I can work with and move forward with, which is really great. You know, there's also stimming, which a lot of my students do, which I don't mind at all, but I know that in typical classroom settings, a lot of teachers struggle with students that need to stim or can't sit still. It's just a part of who they are. There's nothing wrong with it, but.
And I did a video about stimming in the past, but would you share with our audience what stimming is so that if they are unfamiliar with the word, they can have a better understanding?
Yeah, of course. So stimming is basically a way to centralize sensory experience in order to focus on something or bring themselves back to themselves. So a lot of children will stim, or adults, by rocking back and forth, by playing with their fingers, by spinning around, side to side, playing with hair, stuff like that. And it's just a way to go, oh, this is too much going on outside of me. I need to bring it back to myself so I can focus. So it's a little sensory thing.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And my final question is, what would you like people to know about autism?
Well, again, it's not homogenous. Every autistic person is different and experiences things differently. So what I would want people to know is if you suspect yourself of being autistic or you have a loved one that's autistic, don't assume. Don't assume that they know what you're saying. When you communicate indirectly, don't assume that what's best for them is going to be what's best for everybody else. Don't assume that their sensory perception is going to be the same as yours or they're going to like the same things, you know? So it's what I would like people to know is just get rid of your assumptions and listen to the autistic person and allow them to communicate to you what they want and what they need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, T, for taking the time to share with us your experience and wealth of knowledge about autism.